In the early stages of Winnipeg history, we've had a problem with crime in our city. And we've had many homicides, and we're actually called homicide capital of Canada. But this has always happened all the way from 1870 when our first murders were committed. In 1875, we had 6 homicides. And then the following year, we had nothing. But we also had other crimes. And the other crimes would lead into pickpockets, robberies, and theft of personal items. This was due to the influx of people coming to the country. And at one point, there was drunk and disorderly pretty much every day in the city. The police had to deal with all these people, and they were kind of short-handed because the outskirts of Manitoba were run by the RCMP. The Winnipeg City Police had to take care of all the people in the city. The city was growing very fast and they had to add more and more police. Roughly around 1904 in Winnipeg, the city pretty much grew in double its size, and we had many transients and people who shouldn't have been in the city in the first place robbing people of our city. The police demanded more money to set up another police station because their police station was very small at the time and they needed a bigger outsource. And they didn't know how to do it because some of the politicians in City Hall were corrupt, and the police and the police chief knew this. The Winnipeg Police Station on James Street, built in 1883, was getting a little too small because the influx of people coming to Canada, and especially to Winnipeg, they knew they needed a bigger police station. The police officers knew that they would be overrun by criminals, and they needed more room and jail cells. At the time, there were many police officers who loved their job. At the time, they were very underpaid, and some did leave. But a lot of people made a name for themselves, and especially some of the police officers. They took care of the city and sometimes did double shifts just to take care of the criminals and the pockets of murderers happening inside the city. A lot of them did it on horseback, but the problem came in the wintertime. In the wintertime, a police officer would wear a buffalo coat and hat. This would keep him extremely warm due to our cold climate in the wintertime. The other uniform was a British bobby uniform, and all officers would have one. And there is a reason why Canadian police officers at the time had this uniform, and it had to do with the Commonwealth. You do what the Queen does in England. Some were very proud of their uniforms, and people liked to see them on the street. People loved their helmets and watched them on parade. They enjoyed military precision, but they also were on the beat with their billy clubs. Some police officers were issued with billy clubs in bad neighborhoods. There was no use of any firearm in the early days. They were locked in the police station and only used in extreme emergencies, only when needed. That means all police officers at Winnipeg at one time were unarmed. Transportation was used on horseback and later with some vehicles. But mostly every officer in our city was foot walking, and they would walk the beat. And every area would have a phone box, and they would check in on a regular time to point out what area they were in. Communication was key in every realm of the Winnipeg police station, and it was militant. The first women police officers came in power in 1917, but they had different duties. Some of the duties they took care of was taking care of female prisoners, to issue them clean clothing and medical if they needed it. Plus, a female officer can talk to a female prisoner in a different way, and that also goes for children. So pretty much the women police officers were mostly there for child family services in the early days. Most of the children came from slums in Europe and then were also in slums in Winnipeg. They didn't talk to the police because they knew in their countries that the police officer was a bad thing and not a good thing. And the Winnipeg police station changed that. All the police officers had to do was look for crime, and it took place on the Winnipeg streets. And if that individual was arrested, he would be taken down to the station, and he would be taken to court afterwards. First, he would have a photo taken at two different angles, and a card would be filled out. On this card, it would tell the person where that person was from, where were they staying, their name, height, weight, and the crime that took place. Some of the crimes were small, petty crimes that food was taken or something was stolen from a store. Other crimes were more serious that I'm not going to get into detail here. Some were murders, kidnapping, and large theft. Some were also individuals from the United States coming up to Canada to hide from their police. Every individual who was arrested got one of these cards, and then they were processed. Another big problem for our city of Winnipeg, we had many bars and saloons where young gentlemen would get drunk and have brawls. We had many breweries at the time, and there's a lot of evidence for that because the Red River is filled with old antique bottles. But many individuals from Europe were hardworking, and they took care of their families, but they also had a problem, and that was drinking. Many individuals would get into bar fights with other individuals who spoke a different language, and they couldn't understand each other, because they brought their European ways to Canada, and most police officers spoke more than 3 languages, a very good thing. Sometimes there would be issues with prostitution and other violence where people couldn't understand each other and physically got into fistfights, injuring the other person. This was a danger throughout the whole city, and this is why there was people not going to saloons or to bars at the time. There were many individuals who were very young and stole alcohol for their parents, and this is how they got into trouble. Every individual who came into the police station in Winnipeg at booking would get a picture done with this camera. This camera is pretty famous for our city, and you could see it at the Winnipeg Police Station's museum. In the last 100 years, Winnipeg has gone through a lot, especially with the general strike in Winnipeg, where the police department was scared that the protesters might burn down the city. And this was actually good thinking at the time because they didn't want the city to burn down. Other individuals were really scared to have other dangerous criminals in their city. This is why you had a big police presence. And the police station got very big at one point because a lot of individuals came here, like the Klan, and they got kicked out very quickly. The police didn't want them in Canada. And I understand writing up a ticket for an individual who jaywalks or speeds down the street might sound a little strange, but this happens because we need a police presence, just in case the bank gets robbed, or a skirmish at a pool hall would happen many times because people used to gamble there. There were bars throughout every part of Winnipeg, and when the new police station was built, it was a little bit bigger and could handle the situation. Then afterwards, police officers became better trained and knew how to address the situation, especially for the people in Winnipeg. Because not everyone is from here. We're all from somewhere else. And we built other police stations that we later tore down, and now the police officers are in the post office, and we see this crisis happening every day. Now, what do I mean by crisis? Well, the Woodbine Hotel is one of the oldest hotels in the cities, and it had skirmishes since it's been open. And it's always going to be like that. and there's always going to be violence in our city, and it's just something you've got to get used to. The city has good points and bad points, and there's always going to be a problem in the city with drugs and alcohol. It's just part of life, just like every other city around the world. But once you sell alcohol and have a lot of people, you're going to have a problem. And that problem is going to be violence, and you're going to have criminals. And this is going to happen in the future, and it happened in the past. The police are there to help us with this situation. This is not a new story, it's an old one. Thanks for watching.